Well, we are coming off of a beautiful full moon and the advent of the second phase of spring. So we're beginning to see, a lot of plant proliferation and buds and flowers and everything else. And the whole northern hemisphere is in this process of awakening. How are you doing, David? Are you in that journey of awakening as well?
Well, absolutely. And I suppose that's what these chats are for, isn't it? It's to sort of help me, at least, first keep focused on my own journey. But things here are great. Beautiful weather here in Ireland. And I know a few people have been watching our videos in questions. And I think they're finding it useful that we're taking our time with it and we're sort of defining things as we go along with this. And there's a few, we alluded to what we'll be talking about in this video and the last one, but there's a few really good parts in this section. So I'm looking forward to diving into this.
Yes, it's one of those things where you can go through this journey probably 1,000 times, going with partnering up with somebody and reading the course together and discussing it. And every time you would discover that there are new points to be made and new insights to be gained. And that's, I think, the beauty of the course is that it has so many layers and it is such a deep and frequently very dense read, but at the same time, its profound nature just constantly makes you aware of the fact that you're reading something that is definitely not of this earth. It is something that nobody went up on a mountaintop and sat down and scribbled it down. It was a miraculous event, just having the Course in Miracles come into place.
Well, I've read all sorts of psychologists through the years, and this book, it's like it's Mecca for a psychologist. It really is. It's so dense in the information it has. And I remember having this conversation with somebody else a few years ago and how we started reading the course. And once we really grappled with it for a while, and it is hard to begin with, which is kind of my hope for these videos, is to sort of make the ideas, I suppose, a bit more accessible to people, of course. But we kind of had this debate about, what was it like reading the book, and we both kind of came to the realization that, I don't think anybody could have written this book, sort of from an egoic perspective. It had to come from some higher part of the mind. And Helen Schuckman, I suppose, she's said to have channeled this book. And that part of her that channeled it, I suppose it just came through the part of her mind that she had lost touch with, So it's not a book of this world. It's not a book of that the typical author would write, because I don't think anyone is capable of writing anything like this.
Yes, Helen definitely was kind of, I think, from actually, evolving the book. I mean, it came through her, and she was definitely made herself available for the book. But later in her life, she was not a person who would go back and reread it, or who actually practiced the principles, which is quite fascinating. Whereas Bill Thetford was the guy who really wanted to preserve and evolve A Course in Miracles for humanity's sake. So it did have a huge impact on both of their lives.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's kind of reassuring in a lot of ways that Helen wasn't a devoted follower of the book, which makes it even more fascinating. Almost like one part of her mind fought against the ideas and didn't believe the ideas and then didn't apply them. at least as diligently as maybe one should when they're doing this work. But this, the next part, the next few chapters, the next few paragraphs we'll be reading, gets on to things like one of the themes in it is about a feeling of helplessness. Quite direct here in these next few sections, and asks some very interesting questions. I can start off by diving in, Chris, if you like.
We're at section 3, Sin as an Adjustment of chapter 20, the Vision of Holiness, and we're down to the 6th paragraph. So jump in there and give it a spin.
So it starts off, it says, who in a holy relationship can long remain unholy? So a holy relationship, when you come together with your brothers and you see the other person as sinless. The holy see is one with them, just as the world the ego looks upon is like itself. So what you choose to believe is what you see. The world the holy see is beautiful because they see their innocence in it. They did not tell it what it was. They did not make adjustments to fit their orders. So remember last time we talked about adjustments, and adjustments are some sort of a change that you make to the truth, which doesn't need any adjustment. They gently questioned it and whispered, "What are you?" And he who watches over all perception answered, "Take not the judgment of the world as answer to the question, what am I? The world believes in sin, but the belief that made it as you see it is not outside you." So it's saying it's not outside you, and that's an empowering idea. Because if you've got a problem, if you see problems externally, the book is saying that cause of those problems is not outside you, it's inside you. And if it's inside you, that's the great news, because if it's inside you, you've got control over it. So you can change things internally, and when you change these things internally, whatever grievance you have, whatever fear you have, whatever anxiety you have, whatever worries you have, you're in control. You have a way or a mechanism to solve those problems. So it's a very liberating message in the first paragraph, Chris.
It absolutely is. And the thing that that really balances out here is, you know, the world, the holy see is beautiful because they see their innocence in it. And then we go to that next line, they did not tell it what it was. In other words, in order to arrive at a place where you're actually experiencing the world as a sacred place and as a sacred experience, you have to stop passing judgment. And, you know, that really is the core of our entire existence as we go through life and we give meaning to things and we pass judgment on things. And we're not qualified to do that. You know, just because you stuck your hand in the fire and the fire burns you, does not necessarily mean that you can make a judgment about that, because fire can be used in, you know, thousands of benevolent ways as well. So if we see ourselves as being burdened by life's experiences, we tend to run away and hide. We tend to climb into the closet and declare something to be bad. And then, you know, all of a sudden somebody comes along and says, "Oh, no, that's not that bad. Here, I'll show you what you can do with this. You can cook a meal, and you know, you can make a pot of beans and have a great dinner by using fire."
It's a beautiful message, I think, isn't it? Because the sooner you figure that out, the better. Because you get little messages in life, little things will go wrong, or you'll see little problems, like the warning signs in life.
Exactly.
This.
Right.
You
so
look at it the better for yourself. Spiral out, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So that's sort of like the happy learner it talks about in the course. You know, it doesn't have to be a hard journey. And there's an easy way to do this and a hard way to do it. But one other thing there I'd say, Chris, in that was, it asks the question, what are you? What are you? And that's a very interesting question, because I think a lot of people doing spiritual work and self-development work and all that, they ask questions like, well, why did this happen to me? Or, what's the purpose of life and everything else? But it's saying there with the question, what are you? That's an important question to ask yourself. What are you? And it's the real question to ask yourself, because the Course is saying that this whole problem is a problem of mistaken sense of identity. So once you really start to question, what am I? What am I? And you genuinely want the answer. You really want the answer. As soon as you figure that out, everything else falls in place, because you're not this small self. You're not this self that's endangered or needs to solve all the problems in the world. You're not weak. You're not a victim. You are really, what the book says is, you are love. You don't have to seek for it. You don't have to find it. You don't even have to be loved. You are love. And then you just, I think you said last time, Chris, you become sort of like a vessel through which it flows.
Yes, that is definitely a part of the journey. Is that first stage of awakening, where you begin to question the idea that you are contained in a body, because that is a huge encapsulation of that which is infinite. When it suddenly begins to dawn on you that you are an infinite being, and that you do not have a confined or defined sense of self, that generally causes the ego to go into panic mode. But at the same time, the deeper part of who we are begins to have a greater sense of freedom and liberation, and it becomes very exciting. Advance along a theme like that, where we're leaving behind all of the limitations that a concept of self that we created has imposed upon us.
Yeah. About as well recently was, how can you figure out, how in touch you are with the truth of you, on who you really are? How do you figure out if it's me in here having this relationship or this experience right now, or something else? And one of the ways you do it, and you can start off when you do the work, is you just start observing your thoughts. And you can ask yourself the question, how many of these thoughts that I'm having today empowered, or make me feel bigger, make me feel fearless? And I remember when I started doing this work, I started observing the thoughts I was having on a minute-to-minute basis, hour to hour. And it was scary, because a lot of the thoughts I were having were very fearful thoughts, or they were thoughts that I had interjected from my youth that weren't even thoughts at all. And a lot of them made me feel, bad about myself, and anxious. And every now and then I'd have a thought that did make me feel like it was raising my consciousness, but not as often as I would like. So then the job becomes, well, okay, become aware of it. And once you become aware of it, you begin to question, is this me that I think I am really me? And then you start listening to that other voice, that more, how you know you're listening to your higher self is your emotions will tell you the truth. Your emotions are your best way to navigate the truth. In what voice of truth am I listening to? Am I listening to truth or falsehood?
Right. Yeah. The constant brain chatter generally is very disruptive, disturbing, and creates a sense of anxiety. But to that higher voice, which is really just being part of a presence, there is a sense of peace and unity and confidence that is restored. So you can definitely gauge your progress as you start to work with A Course in Miracles, simply because you almost immediately are able to see the differences that the Course illuminates for us, so that we can get a true sense of who it is that we actually are. And then that being said, we're able to pursue our truth rather than to live in fight or flight and be engaged in preserving an ego that's going to vanish at some point anyway.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
So this next section here, seek not to make the Son of God adjust to his insanity. There is a stranger in him who wandered carelessly into the home of truth and who will wander off. He came without a purpose, but he will not remain before the shining light the Holy Spirit offered, and you accepted. Stranger is made homeless, and you are welcome. For this transient stranger, what am I? He is the only thing in all the universe that does not know. Yet it is he you ask, and it is to his answer that you would adjust. So here we've got a very clear understanding of where we place our trust. If we're trusting our ego and allowing ourselves to believe that we are defined by our ego, then we have effectively shut ourselves off from the realization that we are so much bigger, so much more magnificent than that tiny little idea of self that the ego represents. This one wild thought, fierce in its arrogance, and yet so tiny and so meaningless, it slips unnoticed through the universe of truth, becomes your guide. To it you turn to ask the meaning of the universe. And of the one blind thing in all the seeing universe of truth, you ask, how shall I look upon the Son of God? So we're also getting, that secondary effect of defining. When we define ourselves, we define those around us. And we expand that gap of separation. So the only way back, as Jesus taught and as many other enlightened teachers and avatars taught, is to see the presence in everyone that you encounter, to see the Christ in everyone that you encounter. For those of us who, are aligned with that idea of the identity being Jesus, if you can see the presence of Jesus in every individual, when you're out in the park Sunday night and you get mugged and they take your billfold and, leave you without a coat in the freezing cold, it's a struggle, but you have to be able to come back around to a point where you can acknowledge that Jesus was, in that individual. That presence was there. You were experiencing the ego's expression because you were embracing your own ego. But the only way out of this mess is to sit down and to clear your consciousness and to go through all the different individual contacts that you've had throughout each day and bring into focus that deeper truth, that the Christ indwells that individual, whether you were able to perceive that in the moment or not.
Well, that's so true. And it talks about this little stranger that entered into our minds. And I think I've been thinking about lately in relation to all of this is, I always like to think that A Course in Miracles is a very spiritual text, and it's a big book. The message is huge. But I always like to relate back to everyday life, the day-to-day life of living here. And it says things like, the stranger came in and it had no purpose. And it uses the word meaninglessness. There is no, about when it talks about this stranger. And the Course says things like, the world is a neutral place. And, in a way, you could read A Course in Miracles and stand back, or come to the realization that, you know, nothing here means anything, you know. And in a way, it is saying that, but in another way, the ego can take a message like that and really pervert it, you know, this idea of meaninglessness, because, you know, you can become very nihilistic and potential crisis where, you know, nothing means anything anymore. And I talk to a lot of people and they say things like, you know, well, you know, life here is meaningless. There's no point. What's the point? Like in a million years, none of us will be here anyway. What was the point of it all? And that is, make no mistake, that's the ego's interpretation of that particular message, because you see it in a lot of the sort of Jung talked about this a lot in the archetypes, the hero archetype, and different things like that. When a person really says, meaning, I feel like life here is meaningless, and maybe, you know, somebody watching this video will have that feeling, because everybody does from time to time. What they're really saying is, you know what, I'm afraid and I'm anxious all the time and I don't like it here. That's really what that is. Because, you know, that same person, when they're eating a piece of cheesecake or something nice, something pleasurable, they rarely have that thought of, well, what's the point in eating this cheesecake if, you know, in a million years it won't matter if I ate cheesecake or not. It's really more of a thing of the grievances we have in life, and we don't want to look at them. You know, that's what that is. And it's the ego will make us feel overwhelmed and, you know, ignore the little things that pop up in our lives, because meaningless shows up in life when you start to take full responsibility for it. A meaningful life, meaning. And I suppose that section is really, that was the thing that jumped out at me, was this idea of meaninglessness. And once you start to, you have to be careful when you read this text, because, you know, the ego can interpret everything it's saying the way it wants to. So I suppose the takeaway from that is, you can find meaning in your life in very easy ways, but the Holy Spirit or your higher self will never ask you to do more than you're capable of doing right now. So you don't have to go about changing the world. You take daily steps to find meaning in your life. You just look at what's around you, and you'll see plenty to go to work on there, and you just keep moving forward. And that's Jungian's hero archetype. It's the one that has courage to keep going forward with their life and to take on the challenges that they see around them, even though they have this sense that things are ultimately, you know, meaningless, which of course are not meaningless. Even the Course is saying that things are not meaningless, because there is a higher purpose to all this work and an end goal, which is, first of all, we cultivate the holy relationships with our brothers, and then of course, realignment with our source. Yeah.
Yes, that's definitely true. And I think the barometer, as you were mentioning earlier, the barometer lies in your emotions. So when you read a line that says, you know, this is a meaningless world, if that causes you to feel flatlined or slightly depressed or angry or hostile or frustrated, then you know that you're taking the interpretation of that line from the ego.
Yes.
But if it gives you a sense of joyousness,
yes.
Oh my God, you know, all of these hideous things that are happening globally can be reduced to a movie that I watched last night. But now here I am, awakened in a world where relationships are the primary focus, and the love shared between all of us is the primary experience and goal. So you can really tell where you're at when you're reading the Course just by looking at your emotional response to it. If you're in resistance or if it pisses you off, then you're probably in need of stepping back and breathing a little bit and asking the Holy Spirit to make you aware of the presence of peace within you. And then when you feel that start to come forward, all of a sudden a lot of these ideas flip really dramatically, and you're left with a very exciting and positive outcome. And it gives you a sense of buoyancy. It's like you're no longer being dragged down beneath the waves. All of a sudden, you know, you're up on top of the waves, having a glorious ride and loving every minute of it.
Well, absolutely. It's your emotions are the thing that will guide you. And when I started doing this work with the course, and I suppose doing what it said and applying it, that's one of the first things that kind of started to happen for me. Was my heart started to open up a little bit, and I started to feel more emotions, all sorts of emotions. And that's a good thing. You know, you need to start feeling them. Now, if it's an anger, if it's emotion like anger or something like that, you know, you do feel that, but you don't stay in that energy. You just acknowledge it and you let it pass through. But you know, I think a problem with this idea of meaninglessness, we can see it almost, it's pervasive now in the West. We see it in things like science, and you know, even modern philosophy. This idea that, and you know, Darwinian biology, kind of removes God from the situation entirely, and reduces us to these, or you know, sort of a very sterile outlook on who we are as people. And I think, while in a lot of ways, like you could think like something like science has given us a lot. It's given us a lot of comforts in the world, and it has improved our standard of living, we'll say. I think we're getting to the point now where we're realizing that there is a limit to what that can actually give us, because you know, we're more than our bodies. We're more than the atoms floating around in the air, you know, and there is a greater meaning to life than, you know, because I remember when I was younger, the thing that put me off religion was I read about Darwin, and I would see what he had to say, and I just found his arguments totally devastating for religion. I couldn't follow religion after that anymore. And I kind of brought those concerns to people in my community. And I remember even actually having a conversation with a priest and what he had to say, and, you know, what does this mean for religion? And I didn't get any answers at all. So I think I carried that belief for a number of years. I just shut down the whole idea of religion, because clearly what science is saying is that, you know, we're not as special as we think we are. You know, Copernicus did it earlier when he said we're not the center of the universe. Freud did it when he said, you know, people are very, very, we have all these animalistic impulses. But yes, we needed to hear that message. But now I think things have gone too far in the other direction, where soul has been removed entirely from the situation. And it's left us with a sort of a sense of meaninglessness in life. Almost to the point now where scientists are trying to figure out what consciousness is by reducing it to some primordial randomness that happened a long time ago. Like, they can explain what consciousness is, and I don't think they'll ever do that, because it's beyond explanation, if that makes any sense.
Yes, well, that somewhat sterile vision of us and the universe we inhabit has a definite immediate effect. And that is that happy little word appetite. It gives us an appetite. It all of a sudden generates this need to be, you know, fulfilled by consuming something, you know, and that's our secondary response. We can respond to the world's blahness and grayness and meaninglessness by going and eating something or buying something, but it all feeds into the idea of consumerism. And that, again, is a strong reflection of how delicate our sense of self actually is. And as it starts to collapse, as it begins to fall apart, and as the ego's nothingness is revealed to us, we can either spiral downward, or we can look at that head on and say, no, this isn't a true reflection of who I am. There's something deeper here that I sense. And, then that goes back to the idea of questioning, what am I?
Mm-hmm. I think we're on paragraph 8.
Yes. Uh-huh.
I'll continue, Chris. Does one ask judgment of what is totally bereft of judgment? And if you have, would you believe the answer and adjust to it as if it were the truth? The world you look on is the answer that it gave you, and you have given it power to adjust the world to make its answer true. You asked this puff of madness for the meaning of your unholy relationship and adjusted it according to its insane answer. And here's a question it asks us. It says, how happy did you meet your brother with joy to bless the Son of God and give him thanks for all the happiness that he held out to you? Did you recognize your brother as the eternal gift of God to you? Did you see the holiness that shone in both you and your brother to bless the other? That is the purpose of your holy relationship. Ask not the means of its attainment, of the one thing that still would have it be unholy. Power to adjust the means and end. Okay, so in that section, he's talking about the relationship, the holy relationship we have with our brothers. And, if you listen to the ego, you'll have the opposite of that. You'll have unholy relationships. And by continually consulting with the ego will maintain these holy relationships. And then it says, well, how happy is that making you? And I suppose the thing for me is when you're doing a Course in Miracles, your attention shifts quite significantly from oftentimes it's doing things in the world or day-to-day things, to there's a more of an emphasis. I think what I'm trying to say is on relationships with the people, the important people in your life. And that's a great thing, because it talks about, one of the things it talks about is having a holy instant where you come into contact with your brother and you do apply forgiveness and you have this sort of meeting with them. And it really reflects back to you your own true identity. And those moments in life are so special. And one of the things that we can do to facilitate that is just have the goal of, set a goal for yourself in a relationship that you have. I want to join with these people or this person. Even just select one person in your life is a great way to do it. The purpose I have for the relationship with this person in my life is that I want to join with them. I want to see them as they are. And I think it's a great thing to do, Chris, if you can set a goal for a relationship like that, and the goal being a holy relationship, and maybe have it transformed from what it was before into something that will reflect back to yourself the truth about who you are.
Absolutely. And this again gets us back in that looking at things from the level of consumerism. And, the ego's relationships are based on a bartering system. I'll give you a pound of love if you give me a pound of love. And once we start to struggle with ideas like that reciprocity is absolute foundation of a relationship, then you can have a relationship. It may be, one-sided in one sense, in that you're the person who is working very rigorously to see the truth in the other individual. But it certainly doesn't become a bartering interaction. And I think that's one of the things about normal relationships, is that we are conditioned by society to believe that if we give somebody something, then we should expect something in return. And I think that a true relationship, you're going to feel a destiny and you're going to feel a joy, even though your ego is not getting the strokes and the rewards that it demands, because eventually the outcome of all of this is to awaken within each other, to awaken within that realization that, oh my God, I am God and you are God and we are God, and then all of a sudden you're listening to Beatles songs and maybe sharing a couple hours with a hookah, who knows?
Absolutely. And that's great, because think about it that way. Think about like little moments in your life that you can have, because Course is telling us that we're surrounded by love, or opportunities to experience love all the time in our day-to-day lives. And part of the problem is we kind of busy ourselves with things too much. And it's the day-to-day egoic anxiety, right, about paying the bills, doing X, Y, and Z, that sort of make us become not present with the moment or the person that's right there in front of us. I watched recently was, I don't know if you've seen it, it's Field of Dreams. But it's a really nice movie. But in the end of the movie, there's a scene where his father comes back to him. He's a ghost. And it's up to this moment at the end of it, where he kind of meets his father after many years. And what they do is his father just says to him, so they're just going to play a baseball. And really what it was saying is, I kind of heard it as him saying, like, just give me a moment here. I just want a minute with you. And if we could start doing that in our relationships in life, just become present with somebody. Start off small with this, but become present with somebody right in front of you on a day-to-day basis. Just give them a moment, give them a minute of your time. And you will be amazed at how it can transform things in your life and transform the relationships that you have, because you start to, of course, Chris, what you're saying is totally right. Generally, when we're in the egoic way of thinking, it's about barter, and it's about what can I get from this person, and if I give this much, I expect this much in return, and if I don't get it in return, I'll be resentful. Whereas, of course, it's saying, okay, forget all that and just meet the person where they are, exactly as they are, and start applying forgiveness like that. And you will find that over time, you'll start to experience miracles. And a miracle is a true perception. A true perception, in this case, will be of another person that you're talking to. And it's a beautiful thing that happens, and it's a very special thing that happens when it does.
Yeah, exactly. And it's very healing. You discover that your physical problems begin to vanish as you're entering a journey like this, because all of a sudden you're putting your attention on that which actually has value, rather than on glorification of your body, glorification of your smallness, your uniqueness, all of the isms that you hold so very dear about yourself. So we do have to abandon a lot of our old attitudes and a lot of our old beliefs. And I will mention here also that the relationships that we have that are sacred and holy are not confined to other people. I mean, that is definitely the key point here, is that we're working with other people. But you can have a sacred interaction with a dog or a cat or a cow or a ficus tree or whatever, and you can sense that presence within them. All of a sudden, that orange tree that you have in the backyard is producing fruit for you and being of service to you. And all of a sudden you recognize, oh, there is a sacredness here. There is something beyond just this form of a tree. And so anything that exhibits life is going to have those attributes. And at the core of life is love. So when you start looking for the love within relationships that you have with people, as well as with any other presence that is around you, it really amps things up, and it really gives you a much deeper level of existence to experience.
That's beautiful. And it's something else that came to mind as you said that was something I've started doing is, when I think of it, I don't always do it, but before I eat something, if I have a plate of food in front of me, and of course, this has been a tradition in religions for a long time, is to give gratitude to the food that is on your plate, and to kind of start to have a relationship with that food before it actually goes into your body, and to bless it, and to, if an animal gave up its life for it, to just say, listen, I feel you here, and I appreciate that you are giving me life in this. If it's plants you're eating, same thing applies, because it's all alive. And that makes a big difference in the mindset you're holding when you're taking, and you stop eating sort of mindlessly at that point. And I found that that's a very, very good thing to do. And I would also imagine it's probably a very good thing for your health as well, to sort of bless the food before it enters your body, give thanks for it, and be grateful for it. But you're so right, because it's not just the people in your life, it's everything in your life. Because really everything in the world is one. We're one with everything here. So you do have a relationship with everything. It's just that the ones that you have a problem with, they're the ones you need to work on. So you find you need to know you need to apply forgiveness. How do you know when to apply forgiveness? Anything that annoys you, anything that you are holding a grievance against. Yeah, so many people have beautiful relationships with animals, and I think that absolutely applies also.
Yeah, it gives us a greater depth of experience.
Yeah.
It allows us to recognize that life is not confined to the perimeters and boundaries that we had defined it by in the past. So moving on to the next paragraph, prisoners bound with heavy chains for years, starved and emaciated, weak and exhausted, and with eyes so long cast down in darkness, they do not remember the light, do not leap up in joy the instant they are made free. It takes a while for them to understand what freedom is. You groped but feebly in the dust and found your brother's hand, uncertain whether to let it go or to take hold on life so long forgotten. Strengthen your hold and raise your eyes unto your strong companion, in whom the meaning of your freedom lies. He seemed to be crucified beside you, and yet his holiness remained untouched and perfect. And with him beside you, you shall this day enter with him to paradise and know the peace of God. And of course, that's drawing very heavily on the imagery of the crucifixion. And the central statement within the midst of all this horror and chaos was when Jesus made that very beautiful statement, "Forgive them, Father, they know not what they do." And he had arrived at a point where he could see beyond that limitation of I am a victim and you are, doing something hideous to me. So this gives us a real good, clear sense of why the course was formatted in all the stories and imagery we have around the journey that Jesus had on the planet here, is because as this whole process unfolds, the final statement that Jesus makes before he releases the body is to implore very publicly for everyone to hear that forgiveness is the only acceptable response to the situation by and engulfed in.
Yes. And at the beginning of that paragraph, he says that, when you're living in darkness for a long time, comes along and shows you what freedom is, you don't recognize yourself as free for a while. It takes a bit of adjusting to, which is why you don't wake up all at once. Really, it's a gradual process of awakening to yourself, and it perfectly describes. When I was reading that, it reminded me they did this psychology experiment back in the 60s on a phenomenon they came to know as learned helplessness. Martin Seligman was the psychologist, and basically it was very cruel, actually. But they used dogs in these experiments, and they were trying to figure out if dogs could learn through pain. Of course, back in the 60s, there was no ethical standards for how you could treat animals in experiments, and thankfully that has changed since. It was they put a dog into a cage, and they tied the dog down and started to administer electrical shocks. Very, very gruesome stuff and very cruel. And the dog, of course, while it was tied down and received these shocks, it would try to escape. It kept on trying to escape over and over again. But soon the dog learned that, you know what, no matter how hard I try to escape here, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. So over time, the dog learns that to try is pointless. Okay. And what they did in the next part of the experiment was they untied the dog, and they kept giving them the electrical shocks, and they thought, well, okay, well, the dog is free to jump away now, it'll just jump out of the box. And that's not what happened. The dog just stayed there, receiving electrical shocks, even though it was now free to jump away into freedom. And they put different dogs in that hadn't been previously shocked, and they all jumped out straight away. So what it's saying here is, if over time, if you listen to the ego for long enough, the ego will make you feel this big, and it becomes a habitual thing. And the more you do it, the more it reinforces this image of yourself. So it's going to take a little bit of time for you to really start to see this picture as a false image of yourself. Because we all have it. It's not just dogs that fall for this trick of learned helplessness due to past failures or past misperceptions. It's humans, absolutely humans. We are very prone to misperceive. So that was kind of one thing that jumped out at me there. And I suppose that was another experiment that showed us that we're not as evolved as we think we are. We're very like animals in terms of how we learn.
We absolutely are, because fundamentally we're driven by, that fight or flight response. And once our options are taken away from us, when we can no longer fight or flee, then it humbles us. It breaks the spirit within us. And so the only way around that is, supplication, to reach out to higher consciousness, to reach out to the Christ or to God. And that's what a lot of our brilliant history of, transformative experiences is based on, are people who were brought to that ledge, and at that point released everything and surrendered all to God, rather than holding on to the body and going down hard and dirty, as most people do. Because you go to, any cancer clinic, any nursing home in the country where they're dealing with terminal patients, and you see that slow erosion of a belief that life is anything more than a body that is being, consumed by a disease. So it has in the past produced experiences where people transcend the whole physicality of their life experience and have that glorious union, where the holy instant is best expressed in its highest form. And if you want to read a fascinating story, there's a book out there by a woman by the name of Anita Mujori, who is,
I read that book.
Yeah, Dying to Be Me, and that's one of my favorite books. It is a stunning example of having to be pushed right up to the, the edge of life, and then that final surrender occurs. And so that's, that is unfortunately how we have conditioned ourselves, because we were not victims of a group of scientists studying dogs. The poor dogs in that scenario that you shared with us, they were truly victims, but in truth, we are only victims of ourselves, and we have to become aware of that.
It's about taking on more responsibility, I think, for ourselves, and that process of taking on more responsibility grows and grows. And I think you talked about it last time about the distance between cause and effect, and once you start doing the work and get deeper and deeper into it, the results of your thinking manifest a bit faster. So you start to learn quicker and take on more and more responsibility. But maybe I'll read the next one. I think we're on number 10, Chris, are we?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. So was it me? I was to read this one, wasn't I? This is my section?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Such is my will.
Yeah. Such is my will for you and your brother, and for each of you, for one another, and for himself. Here there is only holiness and joining without limit. For what is heaven but union, direct and perfect, and without the veil of fear upon it? There's that word, the veil. It uses that a lot. It talks about how we forgot how we got to this situation. Here are we one, looking with perfect gentleness upon each other and on ourselves. Here are all thoughts of any separation between us become impossible. You who were a prisoner in separation are now made free in paradise. And here would I unite with you, my friend, my brother, and myself. So it's again talking about the joining that takes place with the true image of yourself, and then the joining that takes place with your brothers, and it sort of escalates and it keeps extending itself outward. But you start there, and that last line there, it says, and here would I unite with you, my friend, my brother, and myself. And I think that's interesting because when the awakening process happens, you never say something like, I am awake, because that's an I am awake. I think the realization is that we are awake. You start to see everything in terms of everybody is included, the oneness that is everyone's mind. So I think it's a very, very direct way of putting the message of union there in that paragraph.
That's true. And there is a certain amount of, again, challenging our constructs of self and breaking down those walls, because this gives us a very clear idea that there is an abstract nature to our being, that we are merged one with another with God. So that whole idea of any kind of isolation, any kind of encapsulation, any kind of a sense of you and me starts to erode as we contemplate these ideas about an existence that is so completely integrated that, and without any kind of seams, this totally seamless experience where all of life becomes aware of itself as life itself. So that can be very horrific to the idea of the ego, or to the mind of the ego. But there is a kind of a glorious excitement when you start looking at things from that angle and begin to contemplate the idea that no separations, no boundaries, no agendas, no secret thoughts, no fears, no worries, but just the lividity of life itself, just being fully alive on every level, really blows away any concepts that we have created about who we are.
Mm-hmm. And it's the power that comes with joining with others. Even when you're doing this work, these conversations we were having, Chris, conversations you'll have with other people, but we all know in our personal lives that it's the moments that we're with other people and we're really connecting with other people that make us feel alive. I think that's self-evident. It's when you come together with another person and you have that connection. That's magic. That's really where it's at. And imagine that multiplied a million times over. That's the sort of thing it's talking about here. And it is, I suppose, scary for the ego to think about that. But sometimes the way I think of that is like, you're not giving up anything really, because there'll always be awareness, of awareness just is, and you'll be aware of this new self, but this new self is just a completely different knowing about what you are. The awareness is of you and others joined, and the understanding of them as one, and you'll be aware of that. And I think it says in the course that once you do accept the truth, you'll look back and the old way of thinking about yourself and how you lived, and you'll say, well, what was I thinking? Why did I ever choose that for myself? So the truth is choiceless in the end, and once you do get in touch with the truth, there's no going back.
Absolutely, yes. Because, again, you have an idea of terminal existence that is presented to you as the isolated being, as opposed to eternity that is given to you on the other hand. And you have to be kind of overwhelmed by fear to choose anything else but eternity and ecstasy and joy. So finishing up here with this entire section, the last paragraph says, your gift unto your brother has given me the certainty our union will be soon. Share then this faith with me, and know that it is justified. There is no fear in perfect love, because it knows no sin, and it must look on others as on itself. Looking with charity within, what can it fear without? The innocent see safety, and the pure in heart see God within his Son, and look unto the Son to lead them to the Father. And where else would they go but where they will be? You and your brother now will lead the other to the Father, as surely as God created his Son holy and kept him so. In your brother is the light of God's eternal promise of your immortality. See him as sinless, and there can be no fear in you. So again, it goes back to that idea of the loop effect. Whatever you perceive in those around you is going to have, it's going to color everything as far as your own identity and your own self-perception. So if you can get to the point where you're seeing the holiness in those around you, you'll start experiencing that same holiness within yourself. So this definitely wrecks pretty much 99.9% of life on planet Earth. But at the same time, it opens a wormhole into an arena where there is no darkness with, thousands of stars in the sky at night. There is only light that is engulfed by greater light, that is engulfed by greater light. And when you get to the point where you have even the tiniest experience of that universe, it becomes a very compelling obsession to, to climb that mountain, to get back to where you can see everybody as an innocent and perfect example of God's expression.
Absolutely. And the last sentence there sums it all up. It says, see him as sinless, and there can be no fear in you. So I think we all agree, whether you're doing this work or anything else, every human wants to feel fearless. Nobody wants fear, but we go about getting it in the wrong way, because we maintain that there are sinful people out there. And of course, what Jung said was, that's just your own shadow, and cast it out into the world. So what Jesus is saying here is, see him as sinless. So what you've got to do is, if you see sinfulness out there, if you see your brother is sinful, think again, because you're not getting anywhere without him. You can't leave him behind. You can't leave any man down in the battlefield here. And if you take him with you, you start to go up the chain. So it's you could think about it as a selfish thing, if you want to, in terms of when you should apply forgiveness. Because if you want to live a life without fear, you need to stop looking out there into the world and looking for people as figures of hate or figures of sin. And once you do that, it's great, because you get that joining. And of course, when you don't see anyone sinful out there, there's nothing to be afraid of, because you don't see the boogeyman hiding around the corner anymore, because he's gone, and you realize it was an illusion all along. So a beautiful section, and a beautiful way he finishes it off, I think.
Yes, and the final statement here I would make is lay down your arms. As soon as you recognize that there's nobody that's going to hack you up, then you have no need to be fear-induced to hack others up. And the whole journey of life becomes an amazing process of self-expression and self-revelation. So, well, David, we managed to finish up this section very nicely. Next time we'll be looking at a really cool concept, entering the ark. And yeah, we'll be going 2 by 2 into that ark. And there will be billions of species along with us. How about that?
Sounds great. Looking forward to it already.
Have a great week there in merry old Ireland, and I'll be talking to you soon.
Thanks, Chris. Talk soon.
Right.